Okay, so last week we did, the first part we did faith lost. Now we have faith found. Okay. And I'm not talking about Faith Hill when she used to be famous. Look it up. Look it up. For Eliana here, I tell you, she'd have to look it up. Science, politics, economics, anthropology, sociology, all answer questions of what and how, but not why. The state and the market track change. I just see somebody else approaching, so I got to and give it order but not direction. They're neutral on the questions that matter most to us human beings. What kind of world do we seek to create? Given that we have vast power, how should we use it? We could travel at unprecedented speed, but where do we want to go? The state and the market, our mechanisms for handling power and exchange are impersonal, neutral, and partial. That's their glory. It's what makes them necessary. At the same time, it renders them impotent in dealing with the psychological and social dimensions of change, which are above all personal. Markets value us for what we can buy. Politicians court us for the way we vote. You know, this is all very timely stuff, being before Rosh Hashanah and in a major election year. Do with that what you would like. But to act, create, and take risks, we need the self-confidence that comes from being valued for what we are. That was and is the central truth of the great religions, to which all else is commentary. They make a monumental assertion. Each of us is in the image of God. We are, as Kant said, ends, not just means. We have value in and of ourselves. We exist because of God's love. We survive because of his grace. Though we face the unknown, we are not alone. These are not abstract truths. The genius of the great faiths was to take these propositions and translate them into lives. They teach us how to build families out of love. And answer the door. How to construct communities out of care. How to say the words and do the deeds that redeem us from our loneliness by creating relationships of trust. Faith brings us back to why that must precede the how. Why do we work, build, strive? To create a world that gives dignity to the person that honors the image of God in the human frame. That's what sets human history apart from mere evolution. Other animals have survival mechanisms hardwired into their brains. They're slow to adapt and blind in their adaptation. Natural selection is powerful in the long run, but painful in the short. The strong survive and multiply, the weak fail and die. Human existence doesn't work that way. We are the product not of nature, but of culture. We change because we can imagine different worlds and act in accordance with our imagination. We do not act alone. Through the ideals we share and the relationships we make, we are capable of the most formidable collaborative endeavors. We are social animals, the most adaptive in the universe has ever seen. We are also learning animals, right? That's what we're doing right now. We have a sense of destination. Therefore, we can make continuous adjustments when we drift off course. We can make good our errors within limits. Tshuva, right? That's my note. Understanding our limits is thus essential to hope. We could do godlike things so long as we never mistake ourselves for God. That's a good one, right? You ever know somebody who had a God complex? Doctors, yes, doctors.
Hollywood movie stars.
Hollywood movie stars, yeah. Rabbis. I know a bunch of rabbis. Well, you know, it's amazing that Taylor Swift, she says one thing. I mean, if you don't think that's going to have an effect on what's going to happen, I mean, that's unbelievable, right? There was a great op-ed yesterday about if, let's say, I mean, imagine, depending on who you're talking to, say, it doesn't matter. But imagine if she had endorsed the other way. What they would be saying about her. It's great. I just got and by the way, guilty as charged because, I have children that went to Taylor Swift concert. So it's okay. We didn't eat for like 3 months. Communities of faith are where we preserve the values and institutions that protect our humanity, defending it against the constant encroachments of impersonal forces. These are easy to spot. There are things that turn us into means instead of ends, or substitute prices for values or see us as products of the systems, consumers, voters, rather than as the point of the systems themselves. Impersonal theories erode the meanings that give our lives the dignity of a purpose. They are reductivist. They shrink our stature. They suggest that we are the naked ape, the selfish gene, a bundle of desires rather than a set of aspirations, the effects of causes rather than living works of art, self-created in freedom. Above all, impersonal theories attack the nervous system of human relationship, that most delicate of connecting tissues. They turn bonds of love into conflicts of power. They substitute exploitation for trust. They reread altruism as self-interest. They develop a hermeneutic of suspicion, another name for seeing the worst in everyone and everything, thus learning to distrust the world. They do a search and replace operation of reading I in the place of we. These maneuvers are massively dysfunctional. They destroy the cells of togetherness when we most need them, leaving us vulnerable and alone. It was against just such a scenario that faith was born and will always be reborn. Faith is the ability to move from I to thou. Okay, here you go. This is it. We're the only beings who are self-conscious. We're thus the only animals that know we are alone. Out of this awareness, our ancestors discovered the astonishing truth that God is found in relationship, communication, in words that bind. Speaking and listening, we can bridge the abyss between my loneliness and yours. That's where faith begins, when we speak to God and hear him speaking to us, and we know that we are not alone. From that elemental experience is born our ability to form relationships built on trust, on words spoken, words honored, words that join us to others and others to us. Faith is what redeems us from loneliness and humanizes the world. So I think this is important to keep in mind as we approach Yomim Noraim. Yomim Noraim is a time when, we think about these types of things, but given what we've gone through and what we're still going through right now, everybody's faith is a little more than a little rattled, I think, kind of thinking like, how do I fit into this? But if you use that as a redemptive process to realize that, especially just knowing that other people are struggling with it and other people are having the same questions, but yet we all have a form of communication. You might call that tefillah, you might call that Torah, you might just call that being together and listening to the shofar, whatever that might be. And I always point out that Rav Soloveitchik note that the shofar is the wordless prayer, because there's no other mitzvah in the world in which we're commanded to do so in the middle of davening. Nobody ever said, eat a matzah while davening. Shake your lulav in the middle of it's never happened before, right? It doesn't exist. Like the menorah in the middle of Shemona Esrei. But yet in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and some even do it in the silent Shemona Esrei, we blow the shofar. So Soloveitchik said the reason is because it's not necessarily a separate mitzvah as much as it is a form of prayer.
Also crying.
And that's what it's meant to represent. The different types of shofar sound. So when I go, one of my favorite things to do is when they ask me to blow shofar in the preschools. They don't ask me anymore because my kids got bigger. I have to ask more Ariella if she wants me to come back. And one of the things I said, it actually mocks the different sounds. You have a kid starts going, and then they get a little more so, and then they get really right. That's exactly Tekiah, Shivarim, Teruah. And then when they come, so yes, it's crying. It's a wordless prayer. But what does the prayer say? When you're crying, yeah, yeah,
regret,
yeah, all of the above. It's like,
I need you.
I don't know I don't have the word. I can't put it into words. I don't know what to say. All I have is this raw emotion. So the shofar represents the wordless prayer of Soloveitchik said that we think we know what's best for us. Guess what? We have no idea what's best for us. We think we know what we're asking for. And by the way, davening is only like, a small percent of asking for stuff. Everybody equates davening with asking for stuff because people daven, when somebody's sick, I daven. Or when I have a test, I daven. Or when I have a job interview, I daven. What about when everything's great? Do you daven? When you're perfectly healthy, do you daven? That's when davening is most important. So davening is not just about asking for stuff. And if we think we know what we're asking for, in actuality, we have no idea what we're asking for. So the shofar is the wordless prayer that Soloveitchik said that tells God, you know better than I do what I need or what I should have or what I should be blessed with. Please use this wordless prayer because I don't know how to put it into words. And that's the shofar. That's the sound of the shofar. It's such a beautiful idea. So let's look at the parsha Ki-Tavo. Ki-Tavo, blessings and curses. We have the Tochacha this week, in which the majority of the parsha is read in undertone and very quickly, kind of like the way I always learn. But they lined up on Har Grisim, Har Eval, and we have these horrible, horrible curses that come true, which we know we have seen them come true, unfortunately. But the Torah begins, though, with the beautiful procedure known as Bikkurim. Bikkurim is that they would bring the first fruits. We have it on Shavuos time, and they would not only bring the first fruits to the Kohen, but they would make a declaration. They would make a public, it's called there's something called a vidui meiser, which we have in the parsha as well. But they would make a declaration saying, give a history lesson. The bulk of the Haggadah of Pesach, the Magid portion of Pesach, the psukim that we expound one word at a time, all come from this parsha. Arami Oved Avi, etc., and we were there, and Hashem took us out with a strong arm. Fine. So Ki-Tavo is the God of history. Now, why it's from there? That's a Pesach Shiur, but it's almost Pesach, so we have to get ready. I always say that. That was for you, Elian. When Elian watches this, I always say it's Pesach. Okay. The setting. Jerusalem, you have it 281. Some 20 centuries ago, the occasion, bring the first fruits to the temple. Here is the scene as the Mishnah describes it. There's a whole Mishnah, tractate Mishnah, is called Bikkurim. And obviously, it's about the mitzvah of Bikkurim. Throughout Israel, villagers would gather in the nearest of 24 regional centers. There, overnight, they would sleep in the open air. The next morning, the leader would summon the people with the words from the book of Yirmiyahu, "Arise and let us go up to Zion, to the house of the Lord our God." Those who live near Yerushalayim would bring fresh figs and grapes. I don't like figs or dates. I feel like I'm not fulfilling anything biblical. I don't know. People offer, you go to Israel, people offer dates and they offer fig. I'm like, no, ugh, I'm sorry. Well, and they say that the date trees are actually not even necessarily Israeli by nature. A lot of, like, when you go down to the Dead Sea, you get to the bottom there and they have all those dates. They were imported from Iran years and years ago to regenerate, but they were able to trace the seed or something back to the time of King David or something like, I don't know. There are people that do a lot of agronomy or whatever that's called. So those who live far away would bring dried figs and raisins. Okay, I would be the kid, like if my mom sent that into school with me for a snack, that nobody would ever talk to me and I would never get touched. I would just sit in the bag for like a month. An ox would walk ahead of them, its horns covered with gold and its head decorated with an olive wreath. Some would play flute. When they came close to Yerushalayim, they would send a messenger ahead to announce their arrival. They would start to adorn their first fruits. Governors and officials of the city will come out to greet them, and the artisans would stop their work and call out, "Oh, brothers from such and such a place, come in peace." The flute would continue playing until the procession reached the Temple Mount. There, they would each place their basket of fruit on their shoulder. The Mishnah says that even King Agrippa would do so, right? There's this, when you come into Yerushalayim, although it's all different now because they're changing the Knesset to the ear, you have 3 separate entrances to the city now, but the center entrance, which used to be, like right through Binyan Hayoma, there's a tunnel now. You can go underneath. They're creating this whole new pedestrian walkway and a whole pedestrian mall kind of thing. And when you would come in, though, you go straight like towards the Shuk, Rechov Agrippas, right? That's it, right? So he would carry to the temple forecourt. There, the Levium would sing, "I will praise you, for you have raised me up. Don't let my enemies rejoice over me." It's actually a beautiful procedure about bringing the first fruits. Now, I mean, we have mitzvahs, and do we have such pomp and circumstance with the mitzvahs? I don't know. Maybe some, maybe not, but okay. The scene as groups converged on the Beis HaMikdash from all parts of Israel must have been vivid and unforgettable. However, the most important part of the ceremony was what happened next. With the basket still on their shoulders, the arrivals would say, "I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come to the land that the Lord your swore our ancestors to give us." He would hold the basket by the rim. The Kohen would place his hand under it and ceremoniously wave it. I can imagine by the end of the day, after doing this a zillion times, like, okay, get on with it. The bringer of the fruit would say the passage, the psukim, which we have in the parsha. Again, Arami Oved Avi, Vayeri Mitzrayma, Vayager Sham, Tzei Ma'at, Vayager Sham L'Gai Gadol. So again, these psukim should be very, very familiar with us because this is the bulk of the Pesach Magid portion of the Haggadah. The only thing that we don't have in the Haggadah is the last part where it says, he brought us into the place and gave us Vayivienu Makom Hazeh, Eretz Zavas Chalav Advash. That is not found in the Haggadah, most likely because when the Haggadah was written, the people were not in the land of Israel, and we kind of like, yeah, we can't really say that part. Some added in later when the Jews did get to Israel. Okay, so look what he says. The passage is familiar because we expound part of it, the first 4 verses in the Haggadah on Seder night. All right, so now why this was chosen and we didn't take the narrative from Parsha Shemos, Beshalach, etc. So that's a Pesach Shiur. But right now, this is a Ki-Tavo pre-Rosh Hashanah Shiur. And by the way, the reason why we read Ki-Tavo now, there are certain parshas that have to fall a certain time of year always. So Devarim is always Chazon, is always right before Tisha B'Av. Naso is, or really Bamidbar, is almost always, not every year, but almost always right after, I'm sorry, right before Shavuos. And part of that reason is that Ki-Tavo has to fall at least more than 1 week before Rosh Hashanah. So the reason is because we have the tochacha, the curses that are found in Ki-Tavo, we want to read them before the end of the year. And we say, the Gemara tells us, Tichle shana v'kilel. Every year it seems to be very meaningful, and this year it's super, super meaningful. We say, may this year and all of its horrible curses end. And we want to get it out of the way, read the curses and end, and we could start a new year, but we don't want to go right into Rosh Hashanah, so we have like a buffer. So there's always Nitzavim, or Nitzavim Vayelech, depending on this year's going to be Nitzavim Vayelech, and then we go into Rosh Hashanah. So that's the way, that's always why it is, why it's read this time of year. So it's very poignant that the curses, the new fruits, the Pesach, whatever, but also the getting rid of, like, let's get rid of all the stuff. Let's get, like we get rid of the chametz before Pesach, let's get rid of the chametz before Rosh Hashanah. Halavai, we can go into Rosh Hashanah thinking that, whatever horrible things happen is over. Okay, but you, me, and the lamppost know that that's not happening. But I hope I'm wrong. So, this is not a mere ritual. Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi explained in his Zachar, Jewish History and Memory, constituted one of the most revolutionary of all Judaism contributions to world civilization. Okay, we take a notes. It's Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi Zachar, the Jewish History and Memory, Seattle, University of Washington Press, 1982. We missed a couple. We had a couple of good ones last week, but they're good. Okay. What was original was not the celebration of first fruits. Many cultures, we have ceremonies like this. What was unique about the ritual in our Parsha and the biblical worldview from which it derives is that our ancestors saw God in history rather than nature. Normally, what people would celebrate by bringing first fruits would be the nature itself. The seasons, the soil, the rain, the fertility of the ground, and what Dylan Thomas called the force that through the green fuse drives the flower. That's Dylan Thomas, the force that through the green fuse, that's what it's called, 1933. Now, I'm not such like a fruit and vegetable field guy. I like nature. I like seeing nice things, right? I don't get a, like a husk of corn or something from the super. Oh my God, this was just in somebody's field in, Pennsylvania yesterday or wherever. Because you see them when you drive to camp. On visiting day, you see a lot of fresh fruit stands. So imagine that's where they came from. I do feel like that though when you're in Israel and you have the fruits and vegetables of Israel. And like, wow, this was like on somebody's farm like a few hours ago, whatever. Like, wow, this is amazing. And the cherry tomatoes and stuff I don't eat here, I eat there, except for figs and dates. But it just tastes better. It does. Now, maybe because it actually just tastes better, but also because there's something to it. It's the Peiros and Yerakos of Eretz Yisrael. It's really something special. The biblical first fruit ceremony is quite different. It's not about nature, but about the shape of history, the birth of Israel as a nation, and the redemptive power of God who liberated our ancestors from slavery. Okay? So this is what's new about this worldview before we get to that. So you can go see beautiful things of nature. So I remember when I went to the Grand Canyon for the first time, and people said, oh my God, it's going to be like blown away. And like, yeah, Taka.
I made a bracha.
You make a bracha,
So
yeah,
good
of
that
course.
It was
Also,
wonderful.
Masabratius.
So
Of
good.
course, absolutely. It's and you're but you don't ever think of, oh my God, the rich history of this country and our presence here, or how we stole it from the Indians. I don't think that. Or I was in this summer, I was in the Canadian Rockies and seeing it, and everything that everybody described, spot on. The water looks like Gatorade and Lake Louise, and like, oh yeah, it really does look like Gatorade. And it's just stunning, absolutely beautiful, and you can't get enough of it. And you could, we took an 8-hour drive from Vancouver through the Canadian Rockies to Banff, and like you would never take an 8-hour drive anywhere, but we're just so like, it's just gorgeous. And you see the temperature changes as you go up, and it gets colder and it go down. You still see snow in the mountains and glaciers and melting, like but I don't think like, oh my God, the rich Canadian history. You know what history I saw every time I would pass by the name of a little town, I'm like, oh, I know the minor league hockey team that plays there. I know the American Hockey, the Western Hockey League. That meant something to me. And I went to when we were in Calgary, I stopped in a like a department type store. Imagine like Dick's Sporting Goods, that size, but it was all hockey. So I was like, oh my God, like kid in a candy store. This is amazing. And it's stuff they had on sale at the Canadian dollar. Oh my gosh, right? Oh boy, was my son happy when I brought stuff home for him. But that was great. But I don't think about the rich history. But when we bring fruits to Israel, they're talking about history. So here, Jews were, as Yerushalmi points out, the first to see God in history. They were first to see history itself as an extended narrative with an overarching theme. That vision was sustained for the whole of the biblical era as the events of 1,000 years were interpreted by the prophets and recorded by the biblical historians. Think about it. When you daven, what are you saying? Like we talk so much history in davening without even realizing it. Shebana Beis HaMikdash Meher B'Yameinu, Zeichel L'Tzias Mitzrayim, Zeichel L'Ma'aseh Bereshis. We're constantly talking about Exodus and creation, all these things, right? Because you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. The theme of the biblical history is redemption. It begins with suffering, has an extended middle section about the interactive drama between God and his people, and ends with homecoming and blessing. The narrative is to be internalized. This is the transition from history to memory, and this is what the first fruits declaration was about. Those who stood in the Beis HaMikdash saying those words were declaring, "This is my story. In bringing these fruits from this land, I and my family are part of it." And I think much of what we're seeing now is you're seeing a lot of people this year are telling their October 7th and beyond stories. Because people really understand, they feel like this makes me as part of the land of Israel. I am, people, and rightfully so, it's like, why? I asked people, are you going to battle? Are you afraid? We discussed a couple of weeks ago in Parashat Shoftim about if someone is exempt from battle, they built a new house, they had a new vineyard, etc. And they said, "Mi hayarei v'rach levav." Are you afraid? If you have a soft heart, you can be exempt from battle. But that's only mechames rishus, mechames mitzvah. You have to go. And when I saw, are you afraid? Yeah, I'm afraid, but I have to do this. I have to write this chapter in the history of the state of Israel, and the history of my people. That's what I have to do. Okay. So, and I and my family are a part of it. Not just me going to battle, but those who are staying home, making sure the families run, et cetera, et cetera. Most importantly, the story was the basis of identity. Indeed, that's the difference between history and memory. History is an answer to the question, what happened? Memory is an answer to the question, who am I? Okay, this is very much a Pesach Shiur. You could use this, you could just take this, pick this up, plug it into a Haggadah Shiur and do just the same. In Alzheimer's disease, when you lose your memory, you lose your identity. The same is true of a nation as a whole. So if you look on the note, the historian David Andrews has just published a book, Cultural Dementia, subtitle, How the West Has Lost Its History and Risks Losing Everything Else, applying a similar insight to the contemporary West. And if he was writing it today, it would be like, now they have like Alzheimer's on steroids. When we tell the story of our people's past, we renew our identity. We have a context in which we can understand who we are in the present and what we must do to hand down our identity to the future. Okay? I ask people all the time, and it's an important, I think, practice we should have is know the names of the people in your family. Know the names of your most people can name their grandparents. Most people cannot name their great-grandparents' Hebrew names, believe it or not, let alone spell it. And then they said, like, when grandparents die or you become the next leader of your generation, write down the names. Because then you're going to have kids and grandkids, and they're going to want to name after people. And be like, I have no idea how to spell Zlata. Or how they spelled Bela, with a hey, or with an aleph, or with an ayin. Right? And especially when you had Shoah names and they spelled things differently than we have here. And so that's super important. Like that, but that's part of who you are. That's part of your history. That's part of giving your identity to the future. And even if you wanted to modernize or Hebraicize or Israelicize, whatever the name is, those names, but still you have to know what they are before you want to know what to change them. So we have to have that information. That's why in the back of all those like Yisker books and everything, they have those little empty pages. You're supposed to write down the names and the yard sites and this and that. Now we have our fancy calendars and this and that. But you know what? If you don't have it written down on a piece of paper that's stuck on the inside of a cabinet somewhere, my father had them all written on a piece of paper on the inside of the pantry cabinet. That's what the yard sites were, right? And that's how we knew they were. Yeah. Right. That's what you have to do. Hopefully she'll laminate. You should never have to add any. I like that. Right. It's difficult to grasp how significant this was and is. Western modernity has been marked by two quite different attempts to escape from identity. The first in the 18th century was the European Enlightenment. This focused on two universalisms, science and philosophy. Science aims at discovering laws that are universally true. Philosophy aims at disclosing universal structures of thought. Okay. Identity is about groups, about us and them, but groups conflict. Therefore, the Enlightenment sought a world without identities, in which we are all just human beings. Now, you might call that today intersectionality. If you're allowed to say that word in a shul, I'm not sure. But there's a lot of people don't know who they are, and they just love to yell and scream about stuff that they know anything about. But people can't live without identities, and identity is never universal. It is always and essentially particular. So universalism, particularism, Rabbi Sachs wrote extensively about all these things. What makes us the unique person we are is what makes us different from people in general. Therefore, no intellectual discipline that aims at universality will ever fully grasp the meaning and significance of identity. This was the Enlightenment's blind spot. Identity came roaring back in the 19th century based on one of three factors: nation, race, or class. In the 20th century, nationalism led to 2 world wars, racism led to the Holocaust, Marxist class warfare led eventually to Stalin, the Gulag, and the KGB, and you can imagine how they're going to write the chapter what we're in right now. Since the 60s, the West has been embarked on a second attempt to escape from identity in favor not of the universal, but the individual, in the belief that identity is something each of us freely creates for himself or herself. But identity is never created that way. It's always about membership in a group. Identity, like language, is essentially social. And he quotes from Yuval Harari. He wrote like a few interesting books as well. You can see that note there. So ask yourself, when somebody asks you, what are you? What's the first thing that you say? Let's say you're in a safe space.
I would say a Jew.
Right?
That's what
too.
comes to mind.
Yeah.
Me too.
Say Jew.
You don't say American Jew?
Nope,
No,
I
Right.
think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
I definitely don't.
Me neither.
I don't either.
Or just American.
No.
Sure.
Which is interesting, right? And I,
mother, but
yeah, it's not.
I wouldn't say American.
Yeah. Like, what are like it's a simple question? It'd be an interesting study. Just to ask random, what are you? Without any follow-up. So somebody might say a mother. Somebody might say, I'm a rabbi. Somebody might say I'm a Jew. Somebody might say I'm American. Somebody might say I'm lost. I'm confused. I'm sad. I mean, again, but like, how do you identify? Okay, well, that's a whole. I'm thinking how complicated that game became these days. Even from like, I don't know, 5 years ago, how to identify. If you have a child that's going to apply to college now, and you can see just all the millions of choices that you have to pick off. Oh my gosh. That's just sort of like, who are you? And then I get offended sometimes when, they ask you to do like these surveys after you purchase something, and they ask you how much money do you make, or how old are you? I'm okay with although when I moved up one category of the age box, oh, that hurt. It hurt. Like, I'm no longer into the 35 to 44 category. I'm like, oh boy. Oh, but then they're like race. And first of all, I don't know. I don't like why. Like, I understand why they do it, but I don't love answering that. I feel like, different, better. I don't know. So, just as happened after the Enlightenment, identity has come roaring back to the West, this time in the form of identity politics based on gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. This will, if allowed to flourish, lead to more historical disasters. Oh, what prophecy? We're having it's going to be what, the 4th Yahrzeit this coming October? 3rd or 4th? I'll tell you right now.
It has to be.
The 4th. I think it's the 4th. What?
Because you did, first one you did with Cruz, and he's been here, this is his 3rd.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, because it was Henry Sax's bar mitzvah. Yes, because Henry Sax's, I'll tell you, I know, because it's Henry Sachs, because it was exactly on Henry Sax's Parshas Vayera. He died. I said, you're going from one Sachs to another. You're going to be the next great Rabbi Sachs, I hope. But it was Parshas Vayera, and he's turning 17 because he's getting his license. I hope he's getting his license. You better pass, Henry. So it's going to be 4 years. So 4 years, by the way, look at this prophecy. If allowed to flourish, lead to yet more historical disasters. It's a major threat to the future of liberal democracy.
Profit.
Right? Tell that to somebody who's enrolling to college then, or somebody's enrolling to college now. I have a kid that's applying to college now, and she's has basically zero interest in for what? Like, to do what? To go where? So if you're not going to YU or Stern or Turo or something, I'm just going to go to Israel because why do I want to put myself to any of that. Like, for what? Like, you saw what happened in Michigan this week, right? Crazy. What was happening in Jerusalem when people brought their first fruits was immense consequence. I'm just saying because she has a Jerusalem thing on her Jeep, Michigan thing. Very involved. It meant that they regularly told the story of who they were and why. No nation has ever given greater significance to retelling its collective story than Judaism, which is why Jewish identity is the strongest the world has ever known. The only one to have survived for 20 centuries with none of the normal bases of identity: political power, shared territory, or shared language of everyday speech. Clearly, not all identities are the same. Characteristic of Jewish identities and others inspired by the Hebrew Bible are what Dan McAdams calls the redemptive self. That's Redemptive Self, Stories Americans Live By, Oxford Press, 2006. People with this kind of identity, says, shape their lives into a narrative about how a gifted hero encounters the suffering of others as a child, develops strong moral convictions as an adolescent, and moves steadily upward and onward in the adult years, confident that negative experiences will ultimately be redeemed. More than any other kinds of life story, the redemptive self embodies the belief that bad things can be overcome and affirms the narrator's commitment to building a better world. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, just how does that start? Your suffering of others as a child, strong moral convictions as an adolescent, and then you move upward and onward. Like, this thing is supposed to get better. And then when you find out, it's like, yeah, life doesn't always get better. Interesting studies that were done. I'm just reading this other book now about the history of how they coined the term midlife crisis, which really some guy in Montreal did it in like 1976, and it really wasn't, and the facts didn't really bear what everybody thinks. Like, everything, oh, you do great, and then you just kind of like bottom out. They did this. I came across it. The guy did this study. There's two psychologists did a study about. I might incorporate this into Rosh Hashanah. I'm not sure yet. So if I do, then you'll say, "Oh, I know what he's talking about." If I don't, it's like, oh, "Okay." Everybody knows you get a box of Hanukkah candles, right? How many are in the box?
44.
44. 44 candles, because we do the math, you need 44 candles. Okay. Now, how many, if you have ever experienced having or when you take it out for the next year, you have a box of Hanukkah candles and there's like a bunch left over?
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yep.
Now, there could be, so they studied, why does this happen? Now, for us, it could be, I don't know, let's say you have a lot of menorahs, a lot of boxes, or some of them break or whatever. But they found that they did a study that the very high percentage of people lighting the first night or the second night, and then performance dips. And then we get towards the seventh and the eighth night, the performance rises again. So that's where I get to the conversation about midlife crisis. So, and really what the study is.
So I buy special candles for Shabbos.
Because you're affirming. But the average person doesn't do that, right? Because you're a religious fanatic, obviously, because we know. I mean, everybody would obviously, constitute you in that category, clearly, right? The fanatic Mendelssohns. But aside from that, so the regular people, and by the way, people who don't do anything, they do some sort of Hanukkah observance and some sort of Pesach observance. They do. And the question is that when you bottom out, and then somebody says, you have what he calls the uh-oh moment. And he's compared, let's say, people doing a project and they have a deadline. And when they realize we have 8 days left, we need to do it, they spend a lot of times picking teams and giving out tasks, but nobody does anything. And then we have to, then performance catch it up. Same thing with the
calls it Potsky panic.
Potsky panic. Okay, I like that. But that's exactly it. So maybe in Hanukkah candles, when people get, oh my gosh, we only like the seventh, and it happens. Wait, how do we get to the sixth day already? Seventh day. Oh, I better light it because the third day, I was home late from work, and I do this. A lot of people may not do it. When they get to the end, realizing that they're running out of time, they'll do it. So it's a great metaphor for tshuva, by the way. That's what I was thinking about for Rosh Hashanah. Of when we tend to kind of bottom out, or we just kind of hit a pattern, we hit a groove. Do we ever say like, I need to do something about it? Luckily, we have a mechanism that allows us to say something we could do about it. Or do we be like, I don't know. So that's the interesting the Hanukkah candle thing. But that's this life doesn't necessarily follow this linear pattern of, it gets, you learn, it gets better, and then you're gonna like really do great in your 40s and 50s and 60s, and that's life is amazing. No. Because life is just full of heartache, and you know people who, if it's not you, then you know too many people who have had horrible suffering, horrible losses, horrible challenges, terrible luck. Like, nothing goes right for them. And, it seems to be like more in the majority of people have hardships than people like everything's just great. But I'm saying, but meaning overall, nobody thinks like, oh, life is just great. Life, and that it's good to know other people with hardship, because they like, I'll take my hardship because I don't want their hardship. It's a we say there's 3 stages in life. There's youth, there's middle age, and then there's you look good.
That's funny.
So,
It's fun.
don't tell it to someone who's 80 because
Someday my mom-
they always say like, oh, you look good.
That's great.
but that okay. So that's not so McAdams said that's not more than other kinds of life story. The redemptive self embodies the belief that bad things can be overcome and we think we can make it better. What made the biblical story unique was its focus on redemption. In partnership with God, we can change the world. The story is our heritage as Jews and our contribution to the moral horizons of humankind, hence the life-changing idea. Our lives are shaped by the story we tell about ourselves. So make sure the story you tell is one that speaks to your highest aspirations and tell it regularly, which there is a very big challenge in and of itself. When you ask somebody, you ever like speak to somebody like, how you doing? And then they actually tell you, and you're like, I was just being nice and saying hello. I didn't mean for you to actually tell me. So, and we know these both types of people. We know that there's certain types of people where if they're only well when something's wrong. They're only like a lot, like they have to tell you like everything that's always very negative, the complaint, right? And then you have some people who have like the worst situations in life and they're so positive and they're chipper and they're happy, right? I don't know if you saw, did you see this note that Rachel Goldberg Poland wrote to her shul? I mean, this woman is like some kind of superhero. Like she's really, really, really something. I said it in shul, but those who are not blessed enough to be able to go to our shul on Shabbos, I'm sorry for that for you. But on the Friday during the Shiva, so Gila went to the Shiva. So Gila's school's around the corner, and she went to the Shiva with a couple of friends, and they waited like 90 minutes like everybody else. And they said, you have 1 minute. And she was wearing a piece of tape aside from the number that said, please don't hug me. Please don't hug me. And she went and she said, it was getting close to the break. So just respect, she's like, Hamakam Yinachem. And then Rachel stopped and said, wait, where are you girls from? And she said, we're from TVA. She's like, oh, I know the school. It's great. She's like, that's so nice you came. And she said, I'm also representing my community in Livingston. And I want to know that we've never stopped davening for Hirsch and always on our minds. And she was so appreciative. And then she said, please, all the learning that you do this year, if you could find some time to dedicate some of your learning in memory of Hirsch, that would be really meaningful to me. She said, so Gila actually, the Shana Aleph students just came and Gila spoke to them during Slow Shira the other night. And this is what she told them. That in and of itself is incredible. But then what's incredible is that Shakila gets the Efrat for Shabbos at the head of the Midrashai, spending Shabbos, Rabbi Seif. Rabbi Seif says, you know that Rachel Goldberg Poland just texted me before Shabbos to thank me for having our girls come to the Shiva? Wow. You're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people that came through her tent or whatever. And she has the wherewithal to text the head of the school that and to remember that's who they were. Right? So how we tell our story. Now, some people like to tell the story. Yeah, I don't know. It happens to me all the time when I come to, let's say, do a funeral and I want to get the family information and they have nothing to say about their family. Nothing to say. I come to a point, I'm like, please, I don't want to be the one to speak about your family because I didn't know them. Please, could you speak? Oh, he was good to he liked his family. I'm like, there's got to be something more than that, please. Which is why also I recommend, I know it's a little bit morbid, but write scripts for your kids. What they should say about you, what you want them to say about you, right? Rachel is a good writer. She can write it for us. If you give her the bullet points, she will write it for you. That's a good new service, by the way, pre-eulogy writing. You ever had that assignment in college, like write your own epitaph or write your eulogy, right? We've always said that. But in other words, don't tell your kids, like, this is something that you want people to know. Not in a manner of hubris, just in a matter of like telling the story of your identity, who you are. Let them know. We had this whole session about the ethical will. Let your kids know what charities do you give to? Let your kids know, what are you passionate about? Because you don't assume that they know. Don't assume they have any clue. They just because they see you all the time. But it's you have to have that conversation. But part of it is telling the story, and tell the stories of your family often. And tell it in a way that makes them proud of that story, of who they are and where they come from, this and that. Because if you tell the story, oh my God, this one, and I hated that one, I don't like all the stories only people hear about family fights. That we could last for a year and a yovel to talk about family fights, because everybody has that. But to tell the story of like who you really are, that's important. That's Bikkurim, and that's why every single year they did it, because the fruits are fresh and the perspectives are fresh each year. So yeah, we will hopefully tell the right stories, tell the good stories, and if you want, Rachel will write them down for you for a small fee, for just a writer's creative fee, and she will. If you haven't read, if you get the J&F magazine. You know the J&F magazine, you get that, right? If you want, you could give them money and get one. So she writes the whole thing. She's the Rosh Hashiva of J&F. She's the real strength behind J&F. She runs it, and it's well known.
To the garment.
After the bar mitzvah, what parsha is it?
It's our Rosh Chodesh Kislev.
Oh, nice,
Beautiful.
very nice. All right,
There's lots of-
all right, okay. Anyway, have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You look